October 12th, 1977, Moscow. The rain had started before dawn, turning the narrow cobblestone streets of the Arbat district into slick ribbons of reflected light. A man was running, not sprinting blindly, but with the rhythm of someone trained to survive. His footsteps echoed against the walls, measured and deliberate, as if he knew every corner, every alley, every escape route. Behind him, shadows moved 3, maybe 4 men, their pace steady, their formation tight. They didn't shout. They didn't call out for him to stop. They didn't need to. The way they moved told the story. KGB. The man glanced back once, calculating the distance, the angles, the odds. Then, without hesitation, he veered toward an old side street and stopped at a storm drain. The sound of metal scraping stones split the morning air. A passerby, an old woman with a loaf of bread in her hands, froze as she watched him lift the grate. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness below. Seconds later, the pursuers arrived. They gathered around the open drain, exchanging sharp whispers before one of them crouched down and disappeared into the same black void. The others waited above, silent, scanning the street. That was the last time anyone in Moscow saw him. In the days that followed, no official statement was made. No news reports, no arrests, just a name, buried in a single KGB surveillance document found decades later. CIA codename, Marble, Arbat district. Who was Marble? A spy? A defector? A ghost created by the paranoia of the Cold War? And how, in a city ruled by the world's most powerful secret police, did one man vanish underground and survive for 40 days? To understand Marble's story, we need to descend into a world where silence was survival, and every face on the street could be a pair of eyes for the state. In 1977, the Cold War had entered its most paranoid phase. Moscow was not just the capital of the Soviet Union, it was the nerve center of surveillance on Earth. Every phone was tapped, every letter read, every whisper potentially reported to the KGB. Foreigners were followed from the moment they landed. Diplomats, journalists, engineers, all assumed to be spies until proven otherwise. For American operatives, Moscow was the hardest posting on the planet. Even the CIA referred to it as the city with no shadows. Every move had to be rehearsed, every gesture controlled. A wrong glance, a misplaced phrase, a meeting at the wrong cafe, any of these could mark you for arrest. The KGB was relentless. Its counterintelligence division, known as Directorate K, maintained full-time teams whose only job was to track foreigners 24 hours a day. They changed license plates, rotated personnel, and built entire operations around not being seen. Against that backdrop, one American agent codename Marble operated quietly in Moscow's heart. No records list their true name, no photograph exists. Even within the CIA, their file was whispered about as black level, meaning access restricted to only a handful of people in Langley. Marble's mission remains classified, but fragments suggest it involved information flow through Soviet infrastructure, possibly communication taps or asset extraction from inside Moscow's engineering offices. What little we know begins and ends with that single KGB report. CIA, codename Marble, Arbat district. No elaboration, no outcome, just a code name, frozen in time. In the intelligence world, silence often speaks louder than any confirmation, and the silence surrounding Marble has lasted for nearly half a century. By the autumn of 1977, Moscow was already tightening under an invisible net of fear, and soon, one man's small misstep, one operation gone wrong, would trigger a manhunt beneath the streets of the Soviet capital. It began on an ordinary Wednesday morning, October 12th, 1977. The weather in Moscow was gray and cold, around 8 degrees Celsius. A low ceiling of clouds hung above the city, turning its boulevards into corridors of steel and fog. It was the kind of morning when people hurried to work with collars turned up, when breath misted in the air, and the city itself seemed half asleep. But on that morning, something unusual unfolded in the Arbat district, one of the oldest and most labyrinthine parts of Moscow, a place of narrow lanes and aging apartment blocks. At approximately 9:15 a.m., residents began noticing movement that didn't fit the rhythm of daily life. A man, foreign-looking, according to some, was running through the street, not in panic, but with sharp intent, weaving between pedestrians, his coat drawn tight. Behind him, 3 men followed. They moved fast, but without chaos. Their coordination gave them away the precision of professionals, not street pursuers. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like an argument or an accident. But to anyone watching closely, it was clear this was a hunt. One witness, a baker's wife buying bread at a corner stall, recalled decades later that the man passed just meters away. She remembered his eyes not wild with fear, but focused, scanning every doorway, every intersection. He looked like someone solving a problem in his head, she said. He darted into a side street, the kind that locals used as shortcuts, but which rarely saw traffic. The men behind followed seconds later, spreading out to block exits. They didn't shout, they simply moved with purpose. That was when the baker's wife saw something that would stay with her until her death. The man stopped abruptly at a storm drain, crouched, and gripped the iron grate. With a rasping metallic screech, he pulled it open, a sound that echoed down the street like a warning. Then, without hesitation, he lowered himself into the darkness below. By the time the pursuers reached the spot, the grate was still vibrating. They gathered around it, peering down, muttering sharply to one another. One of them dropped to his knees and disappeared into the hole, flashlight first. The others spread out, scanning rooftops and alleys, pretending to be ordinary workers. For the citizens of 1977 Moscow, curiosity was dangerous. No one approached, no one spoke. In that era, the safest way to survive was to look away. Later that week, the city began to change in small but noticeable ways. Utility trucks appeared in the Arbat district, vehicles marked with city maintenance emblems. Men in grey coveralls worked near manholes and drains, shining lights downward. They didn't seem in any hurry. They came and went at odd hours, sometimes staying through the night. At first, people assumed the city was repairing pipes, but the timing was strange. There had been no public notice, no water outages, and the work never seemed to end. A retired tram conductor later recalled that for nearly a month, there were always men near the drains, always watching, as if they were waiting for something to crawl out. The KGB, of course, never announced a manhunt. They didn't have to. When a foreign operative vanished beneath Moscow, the operation became an internal secret wrapped in layers of bureaucracy and silence. But there were subtle clues. Newspaper snippets in Moskovskaya Pravda and Izvestia spoke vaguely of emergency infrastructure inspections and temporary underground safety measures. These were standard cover stories, used whenever the KGB mobilized resources for covert operations. Inside the tunnels, it must have been a different kind of war. The Moscow sewer system was ancient miles of dark, dripping channels dating back to the Tsars, merging with modern pipes and forgotten basements. It stretched for hundreds of kilometers beneath the city, connecting rivers, power lines, and hidden chambers. Navigating it without maps was nearly impossible. But Marble had one advantage. He had disappeared into a world the KGB didn't fully control. For the next several days, the hunt intensified. Eyewitnesses described more men in work uniforms opening hatches and descending into the underworld. At night, faint flashes of light could be seen through street vents, as if the earth itself were breathing. Every tunnel was checked, every drain sealed, every possible exit guarded. They used dogs trained for scent tracking, engineers who knew the layout, and field agents who didn't ask questions. But finding one man in a maze of darkness is like chasing smoke, and the deeper Marble went, the more invisible he became. Above ground, life continued. Students filled the trams, vendors sold sunflower seeds, and propaganda banners proclaimed the glory of the Soviet future. But beneath that normality, a secret war was unfolding, one that would never make the headlines, one that the CIA would never admit to, and one that the KGB would never record in its official archives. In the months and years that followed, the story of the man who vanished into the sewers became a whisper among intelligence circles, half legend, half warning. For some, it was proof that no one could outsmart the KGB for long. For others, it was evidence that even in Moscow, the most controlled city on earth, one man had defied the system and disappeared. And yet, for all the speculation, only one fact was ever documented. CIA codename, Marble Arbat District. That's cruel. Everything else, the chase, the drain, the silence that followed, became the mythology of survival. When the grate closed above him, Moscow vanished, replaced by a world of dripping echoes and absolute darkness. The man the KGB called Marble had traded the city's endless surveillance for a different kind of prison. The sewers beneath Moscow, a labyrinth older than the Soviet Union itself. Down there, the air was thick with damp rot and the metallic tang of rust. The tunnels twisted endlessly, some wide enough to stand, others forcing him to crawl. His flashlight was weak, the batteries rationed. He moved by instinct, counting turns, memorizing the feel of each pipe beneath his hands. He knew the KGB would follow. They would flood the drains with search teams dressed as maintenance workers, descend with dogs, lights, maps. Their advantage was manpower, his was silence. In the first days, Marble survived on the emergency rations hidden in his coat, a few protein bars, water purification tablets, and a collapsible cup. He drank from condensation that formed on metal pipes and from trickles of cleaner runoff near the freshwater conduits. Every drop had to be tested, every sip a calculated risk. Sleep came in fragments, an hour here, 30 minutes there, his body pressed against concrete, his ears tuned to any sound that didn't belong. The rumble of water, the distant thud of boots, the sharp bark of a dog echoing through the maze. He couldn't afford to leave signs of life. No discarded wrappers, no footprints in soft sediment. He even masked his scent with sewage, a trick once taught in CIA field school but rarely used in real missions. It worked. The dogs passed him once, close enough for him to hear their sniffing. They didn't stop. Above ground, the KGB tightened the net. Entire sections of the Arbat were effectively sealed off. Trucks parked over manholes. Agents monitored every drain that touched the Moscow River. A report surfaced years later describing unusual operations involving city utilities and structural safety inspections. Those words, bland and bureaucratic, likely hid one of the largest internal hunts the KGB ever conducted for a single man. Below, Marble listened to it happen. The city hummed overhead like a living organism, the vibrations of trucks, the distant rhythm of boots on pavement, the clang of iron lids being lifted and replaced. Every sound told him something: where they searched, how close they were, when to move. He followed the tunnels deeper into the older sections where 19th century stone gave way to brick and the smell grew worse. The deeper he went, the less the KGB could reach him, but the harder it became to stay alive. After a week, hunger became a living thing. The human body can last 3 weeks without food, but clarity fades long before that. Marble began rationing himself a few crumbs of a crushed bar, a mouthful of stale water. He used pain to stay awake, pressing his hand against cold stone until his fingers went numb. Anything to stay conscious, to stay in control. But the tunnels were merciless. Moisture seeped through every seam, chilling him to the bone. His clothes were never dry. The air was barely breathable in some sections. Methane built up in pockets that could suffocate or explode with a single spark. His flashlight failed on the 10th day. After that, he learned to see by sound, listening to his own footsteps, feeling the air shift in wider spaces, following the faint drafts that hinted at an exit or a larger conduit. He marked his path with small scratches, knowing that in the dark, losing direction meant death. The marks grew fainter as his strength faded. Meanwhile, The search above continued. Residents remembered maintenance workers everywhere opening drains, shining lights, then closing them again. One man living near Smolenskaya Street later said they were searching for something down there, and whatever it was, they never found it. The KGB likely realized by late October that their target was still alive. Perhaps they intercepted signs, disturbed mud, misplaced debris, traces too faint for civilians but obvious to trained eyes. Their challenge was scale. The Moscow sewer system sprawled beneath hundreds of square kilometers, connecting with old waterworks, metro tunnels, and forgotten basements. Even the KGB, with all its resources, couldn't search every meter. So they waited. They set ambushes near the exits, confident that no human could survive long underground. But marble didn't come up. By the third week, time lost meaning. Days and nights merged into one endless hum of dripping water. Hallucinations came, voices whispering his name, flashes of light that weren't there. He forced himself to recite coordinates, mission details, anything to stay anchored to reality. And then, perhaps on the 25th or 30th day, something shifted. The city above grew quieter. The sounds of pursuit faded. Marble sensed that the search was thinning out. He had outlasted the hunters. But survival was no victory. His body was failing, trembling from cold, vision blurring, his mind reduced to instinct. Each breath was an act of will. He had become a ghost, moving through the dark veins of a sleeping empire. In early November, rain hammered the city, flooding parts of the sewer system. The rising water forced him toward higher ground, closer to the surface. He heard voices again, Russian, faint, angry, and froze. They were sealing the drains, one by one. If he didn't move soon, he'd drown where he stood. Somehow, he kept going, crawling, slipping, clawing through the wet brick tunnels. At one point, he found a dry alcove and rested. From his pocket, he took a small waterproof pouch, the kind used for field notes, and began to write. What he wrote, no one knows. Only fragments were ever found. Smudged English words, letters scattered by time. That act, writing in the dark, may have been his last link to the surface world. 40 days after he vanished, on November 21st, 1977, the search abruptly stopped. The maintenance trucks disappeared. The manholes were sealed. The KGB moved on to other priorities. The official reason was never given. Perhaps they concluded he had died. Perhaps orders came from higher up to bury the failure. Or perhaps, and this is the most haunting possibility, they knew he was no longer there. Marble had survived 40 days beneath Moscow. No one knows how he came out, or if he ever truly did. Above ground, Moscow carried on as if nothing had happened. The November wind scraped across Red Square, tearing at banners that proclaimed peace through strength. Workers rushed through puddles of slush, unaware that beneath their feet, a silent chapter of the Cold War was ending. For nearly 6 weeks, the KGB's subterranean operation had consumed resources and manpower. Dozens of agents rotated through the tunnels, tracing dead ends, cataloging every possible exit point, but each day brought the same conclusion: no sign of the fugitive. By mid-November, patience was running thin. Reports reached higher offices that the operation had yielded no result. The bureaucrats in Lubyanka, the KGB's towering headquarters, began questioning whether the man had died in the depths or worse, escaped. Inside that building, decisions were never emotional. Everything was arithmetic. How much manpower does a ghost deserve? How much embarrassment can be risked if the West learns we failed? At some point, the calculation tipped. Orders were given, the search ended. On November 21st, 1977, the maintenance crews vanished overnight. Residents of the Arbat noticed it immediately. No more trucks, no more men in coveralls. The manholes that had been pried open for weeks were suddenly sealed and left untouched. The city returned to its rhythm, as if the incident had been erased from history. But some remembered. A shopkeeper on Plotnikov Lane later told a researcher, "It stopped as suddenly as it began." They were there one day, gone the next, like someone had decided that whatever they were looking for no longer existed. Why did the KGB pull out so abruptly? There are theories. One claims they concluded Marble had died below ground from starvation, infection, or toxic air. In bureaucratic logic, the dead posed no threat. Another suggests the search was halted to avoid diplomatic fallout. If the man was indeed a CIA operative, publicly admitting that an American spy had infiltrated Moscow and evaded capture for over a month would have been a humiliation the Kremlin could not afford. And then there's a darker theory, that the KGB did find something, not the man himself, but evidence that someone or something had helped him. Weeks later, rumors began circulating among Moscow's underground maintenance crews. Some spoke of discovering makeshift camps, scraps of fabric, candle wax, even a faint smell of smoke deep in the tunnels where no worker had reason to go. Others claimed that a drainage outlet near the Moskva River had been found unsealed one morning, though no one could say when or by whom. That same week, a night watchman patrolling near the riverbank told his supervisor he'd seen a figure emerge from one of the massive drainage pipes, thin, limping, soaked to the bone. The man moved quickly along the embankment and disappeared into the mist. The watchman never filed an official report. In 1977, such a story could destroy a career. If true, it meant that Marble had survived the impossible 40 days in the dark and a journey out through the veins of Moscow itself. But if he escaped, where did he go? The river emptied eastward. From there, he could have reached the outskirts, perhaps found refuge in a safe house or a hidden exfiltration route through Finland or the Baltic states. The CIA's Cold War manuals described exactly such contingencies. When escape becomes impossible above ground, use the enemy's infrastructure below it. Was Marble following a prearranged plan or simply improvising on instinct? No one can say. For 16 years, the story of the man beneath Moscow remained an urban legend whispered among veterans of both sides. Then, in 1993, as Russia opened parts of its old archives, a discovery reignited the myth. During routine maintenance of a disused sewer branch near the Arbat, city workers found a small, waterproof pouch wedged deep in a wall crevice. Inside were several sheets of deteriorated paper, half-rotted, blackened by damp. The ink had bled, the words reduced to fragments. Forensic experts determined the documents were written in English and had likely been underground since the late 1972. Most of the text was unreadable, but 3 details survived. A partial word, day, asterisk. Another line beginning with W, perhaps water or weight, asterisk, and scattered letters T, R, N. It was nothing coherent, yet enough to spark obsession. Western journalists called it the Marble Papers. Were they survival notes, a field report, a confession? The Russian authorities, when questioned, offered no comment. The pouch was logged, photographed, and quietly archived. To this day, those papers have never been publicly released. In the world of espionage, the absence of evidence often is the evidence. The CIA's silence about Marble, no acknowledgement, no denial, no mention in declassified histories, suggests something they prefer forgotten. And the KGB's refusal to record the outcome in their own archives suggests failure. A few historians believe Marble did make it out, that he was extracted quietly from the Soviet Union, debriefed, and given a new identity somewhere far from the world of intelligence. Others think he died within hours of reaching the surface, starved, delirious, collapsing into the mud near the river before anyone could help. But there's also a final, more haunting idea that he never intended to escape at all, that the mission's true purpose was to disappear to test whether a man could survive unseen beneath the most controlled city on Earth. A living experiment in invisibility. More than 40 years later, the tunnels of Moscow still whisper. Urban explorers claim to feel cold spots near the old Arbat conduits, where the walls bear strange markings, faint scratches that don't match utility records. Some believe they were left by marble, counting days in the dark. Others say it's superstition, a story for those who need ghosts to make sense of the past. But one thing is certain, no one ever found his body. No one ever closed his file. In the end, marble became what every spy fears and perhaps secretly desires, a myth. In the cold language of intelligence reports, Marble's story ends with a line that doesn't exist. No subject captured, no operation concluded, just silence, the kind that swallows a name whole. But for those who had hunted him, the silence was unbearable. Within the KGB's counterintelligence division, Marble became a cautionary legend, a reminder that even in the heart of their empire, control was never absolute. Rumors circulated among officers, some claimed he had drowned, others swore he'd escaped through a forgotten aqueduct into the Moskva River. The truth, as always, hid behind layers of bureaucracy and pride. At the CIA's Langley headquarters, the code name appeared only once in the internal registry, Marble divided by active 1977. No follow-up entries, no closure. Perhaps the agency knew what happened. Perhaps they didn't. In the world of espionage, not knowing is sometimes safer than knowing. For Moscow's citizens, the legend took on a different shape. Through the 1,980 seconds, whispers spread among sewer workers and construction crews. They spoke of the American ghost, a man who had lived where no one could beneath the beating heart of the Soviet capital. Children turned it into a story. Don't go near the drains of Arbat after dark. That's where the spy still breathes. It sounds absurd now. But in those years, fear and imagination shared the same air. And somewhere, buried under the weight of propaganda and secrecy, Marble's 40 days became 40 years of rumor. In 1994, a retired Russian engineer who had worked on the original sewer search gave an interview to a Western journalist. His voice, old and brittle, cracked as he recalled those weeks. "We thought we would find a body," he said, "but after 40 days, we found nothing. Only the tunnels breathing, as if the city itself had swallowed him." He paused. "That's when I knew," he added, "we had lost." For him, Marble was proof that a single man's will could outlast a system built on fear. But others saw it differently. To the KGB, Marble wasn't a hero, he was a blemish, a ghost they could never exorcise. And perhaps that's why both sides agreed to silence. Neither agency wanted to admit that Moscow, fortress of the Soviet world, had been defeated by one man and a storm drain. If Marble survived, he would be an old man now, somewhere in quiet exile, living under another name, perhaps still waking up at night to the sound of dripping water. He would be one of the few who truly knew what it meant to disappear, completely not in death, but in survival. There's a saying in intelligence circles, the perfect operation is the one no one can ever confirm. Maybe that's what Marble achieved. Maybe he didn't just escape the KGB, maybe he escaped history itself. Every generation of spies leaves behind a handful of unsolved mysteries. A face without a file, a code name without a real name, a trail that ends in darkness. Marble belongs to that small, sacred list alongside the Cambridge Five, the Red Orchestra, the double agents who vanished between worlds. But his story is different. It isn't about betrayal or ideology, it's about endurance, the raw human instinct to live one more day, one more hour, even when the world above believes you're gone. Decades later, in a dusty Moscow archive, a photograph surfaced, a close-up of a wall deep inside the city's old sewer network. Faint markings can be seen carved into the brick. Not Cyrillic, but Latin letters eroded, almost erased. Some say they spell day. Others think it's coincidence, just mineral stains shaped by time. No one can prove it was him. No one can disprove it either. And that's the heart of the story, the absence that refuses to fade. Somewhere in the dark veins beneath Moscow, a man once fought for 40 days to stay alive. No medals, no monument, no name carved in stone. Only a code name, Marble, and a silence that has lasted half a century. Was he a spy who outsmarted an empire, or just a man who refused to die? The truth, like the tunnels themselves, remains underground. This story, like every story in our world today, hasn't truly ended. If you found these insights valuable, please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. And tell us in the comments, do you think Marble escaped? Or did Moscow bury him forever? See you in the next report.